This is always just so exciting for me because I kind of get this idea. It's like, oh, it's going to be Palm Sunday. Maybe I'll read a little bit about what that is, and then I start following the little trails that lead here and there, and finding puzzle pieces. And I get so excited, I think because I'm a teacher, I got to tell somebody. And so this is really fun for me. So if you grew up in a liturgical church, or you know anybody who goes to, an Episcopal church, a Catholic church, Lutheran church, Palm Sunday is a big deal. It was for me when I was growing up. Well, it wasn't a big deal in here, but it was a deal. But it's also called, in theological terms, it's called the triumphal entry. That says a lot more than Palm Sunday. And I just hope that there are a few things, or more than a few, that grab us and go, oh, look what God is doing again. This is not just a story. We all know, okay, Jesus came in and there's a donkey in there. They're throwing their coats around. They're waving the branches. They're singing Hosanna, or saying Hosanna. I know that Jesus came in, and I know Easter's in a week, and that's probably about as far as we ever go with it. One of the things to keep in mind is that this is in the context of Passover. So Easter and Passover, well, at least I will say that Easter and Passover are sometimes close together in our times now, but for instance, now they're almost a month apart. But it always happens on the same day in the Jewish calendar, and it just happened, they can trace it back, that Passover was on that Thursday that Jesus had the Last Supper. And backing up, this would have been the day that he came into Jerusalem. He was always coming into Jerusalem, but the way he came in this time was so prophetic. It was like, nobody realized it. Even his disciples didn't realize it. His coming in the way he came in, said, this is a thing. I am coming in to establish my authority. I am coming in to do what I came to do. I am coming in to pay your price and rise again. So, goosebumps. There were a lot of people in Jerusalem on this day. They had to come in for Passover. And John says, I'm going to read the little bit from John, but it says, let me find it. Hang on. Well, it's in here. I'll read it, but it said that the whole city was excited. They're excited about Passover. They're already, the whole city. This made an impact on the whole city. It didn't just say those who love Jesus. Yeah. This is the whole city. Okay, it's just so rich in symbolism, both in cultural ways and in Jewish tradition. And I want to say again, I think I've said this every time that I have spoken, it's important for us to remember. It's important for us to remember. It gives us a chance to reaffirm our own faith, to celebrate if we have an active faith. If we're doing it as a religious observance, there's really not anything to it, which is how many people celebrate it. Easter too. The triumphal entry has an account in each of the four Gospels. They're very similar. There are just one or two interesting diversions that I will only mention when it's important. I'm going to read Matthew's Gospel, and I would urge you this week that we call Holy Week. I call it Holy Week, or there's another name for it. Anyway, it doesn't matter what it's called. But this whole week leading up to Easter, I would really encourage you to read all the accounts of this week. It just gets you ready. It reminds you what the point is and leaves you with such a full heart. So here is Matthew 21, 1-17. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, I'd like to just pause there. He's coming into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives because he had to go through that way from where he was coming from. And in 4 days or so, he was going to be back there again, waiting to be arrested, in agony before the Father, because he knew what was coming. So here's a triumphal entry, and there he's treated like a criminal when he returns. Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say, daughter of Zion," which means all of Israel. "Say to the daughter of Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." I forgot to write the reference there. I think it's later. But anyway, fulfillment of prophecy. The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. More on that later. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven." When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred. That's the part I wanted to find. The whole city was stirred when he entered Jerusalem. The whole city. May we all be stirred, Lord, in this region. And they asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." They knew who he was, but they weren't expecting who he was. Jesus, some have it as the same day, some have it as first thing the next day because they said it was late when he came in. But it's still interesting that shortly after this, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all those who were buying and selling, asserting his authority again. It's like, this is mine. Now I'm taking it back. All right, so everything that he does is intentional. The timing is intentional. The way the puzzle pieces fit together is intentional. And you miss that, if I don't mean you, I mean we, I should always say we. We miss it because we don't go deep enough. We just read the surface, and that's better than nothing, and sometimes that's all there's time for. And some are more prone to digging than others, but there's so much. The gospel accounts of Jesus coming into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives has him coming into the East Gate. The East Gate I saw when I was in Israel. It is the only one that is a double arch. The gates are not things that you open. It's not like a gate in your fence. Gates are openings to the city that's surrounded by a wall. So you wouldn't even know you were going through a gate if it wasn't marked. But this is the only one that's double. It is the one that the high priest went through to get to the temple. Only the high priest and his aides went through this east gate. It's also called the Golden Gate, and it's called the Gate of Mercy, which I find interesting. You would never go through the gate on a donkey. This gate, never. Your average person would never go through this gate. This was reserved because it was so close. And even the high priest would only go through it when on Yom Kippur, because he had to bring in the red heifer that was used in sacrifices for purification and atonement. And it's also the gate that they let the scapegoat out from. Bad sentence, but you catch my drift. On the Day of Atonement, they tied a red thread onto a real goat called the scapegoat. The high priest would lay the sins of the people on the scapegoat, and they would let it go out the east gate just to die in the desert. So, so many pieces in there. This gate it's been rebuilt because Israel's on layers, but it's sealed up now. Interestingly enough, it was sealed by the Ottomans, who it's written that by the Jews. I don't know if this is true or not, that they wanted to keep out the Messiah. So I don't know. Be that as it may, he will return through the east gate. So it's very exciting that that's how he came in to Jerusalem. So many other things I could say about that I have to leave out. But there is a prophecy about this gate from Ezekiel 44. And the Lord said to me, then he brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, which faces toward the east. But it was shut. And the Lord said to me, this gate shall remain shut, it shall not be opened, and no one shall enter by it, for the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered by it. Prophecy there. Therefore it will remain shut. Only the prince may sit in it to eat bread before the Lord. So there's a lot of symbolism just around the gate that he used to come into the city. Does not come into the city on a big fancy horse, comes in on a donkey. The Lord bothered to say it was a donkey. I don't know how much you can make of this, but it is true that it never says in any of the other Gospels that Jesus rode anywhere. It talks about his walking. I don't know, maybe he did, but this time it's important. He comes in on a donkey. No, like I said, nobody would come into the east gate of the temple on that kind of an animal, which was a pack animal. You know, they were important because of the work they did. They were not important because they were royal or kingly. Yeah. So this is a horse. You all may know some of this stuff. Horses are symbols of war and power and wealth, and kings who had won battles would ride on highly decorated horses to come into the city after they had gotten their conquest. It was a big deal. This is a donkey. But also in this culture, a donkey symbolizes peace and stands for meekness and peace. This prophecy is fulfilled in Zechariah. This is really important. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, a righteous king and having salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Prophecies fulfilled right there with something as simple as riding a donkey. It's just exciting to me. So then we also read in all of the accounts that people threw their cloaks on the donkey and on the road. Like, well, they're trying to honor Jesus. More than that. Cloaks at that time were a big deal. They were your identity. They told people who you were, kind of just like a name. And so this is these are not just kind of like maybe we see in the movies where it's just a thin wrap. Their cloaks were, as much as they could afford, they were woven out of really good cloth. They were heavy. They could be highly decorated. They could have different colors in them. And it went with them everywhere. In fact, they used to use them as blankets, even if they needed to, on the ground or over themselves. It just was a piece of who they were. And so people greeted Jesus with these cloaks on the donkey, this pack animal, not a great steed, in the dirt or on the dirty cobblestones there. It was like, I'm putting who I am down in front of you to honor you. And I think many of them were just caught up in the hubbub of the day, because not everybody believed it. But I think they wanted to. They were hoping for this Savior that had been talked about in the Old Testament. This is an act of submission, to put your identity down for the donkey to walk on, for Jesus to sit on. We would never let anybody sit on our fur coat. Not that people have those anymore. I'm just trying to think of something that would make sense. It's like, don't sit on that. No, people are throwing it down. And it says that Jesus sat on it. Three of the Gospels say that Jesus sat on these cloaks. But they're not just making sure he's comfortable. They're honoring him. And interestingly, Luke is the only one, because he does seem to add details. Luke is the only one that says it doesn't just say Jesus sat on it, it says they set Jesus on it. And there was, in my reading, the thought of you lead a king to a throne and put them in it. So there was an active placing him on this. This was a very customary thing to do for kings. In 2 Kings, King Jehu was greeted with cloaks and the same kind of thing when he was hailed as king. So the cloaks are important. The palm branches. Actually, only one of them says palm branches, only one of the Gospels, but the rest of it was just cuttings from trees. And they're very greenery, and palm trees are all over Israel, so I have no trouble believing they were handy. But the greenery, including palm leaves, are required in some of the Jewish festivals. And so it was a natural thing to do. But they also would hail victorious Roman soldiers and kings with greenery also. The Roman generals would ride over palm branches on their return from a victorious battle, kind of like, rolling out the red carpet. So they've got the palm branches, and they've got the cloaks, and this is the whole city, if you can picture this. Leviticus 23:40 says, "And you shall take for yourselves on the first day," this is about the festival, "the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of leafy trees and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days." This is about a different festival, but the Lord does mention palm branches as something to incorporate in worship. And then they're shouting Hosanna, which you probably think is a Latin word. It's not, it's actually just flat out Hebrew. And it's very similar to the Aramaic, which just leaves off the H. And so they're crying Hosanna to the Son of David. I'm sorry, I grew up in the Catholic Church, so I will never say Hosanna. That song that goes, Hosanna. I'm like, yeah. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The Gospels say they were saying that. Hosanna in the highest heaven. This is from a psalm that the Jews regularly incorporated. Psalm 118. Save now, I beseech thee, Lord. Blessed be he that comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna means salvation. It means help. It means deliverance. It means, Hebrew is never like it just means this one thing. Some are. But in these conceptual kinds of words, it can mean a whole lot of related things. they said they were worshiping him as the coming king, but he did not turn out to be the kind of king that they expected. They're expecting somebody who would deliver them from the pagan rulers, and right then from the Romans, who were making life miserable for the Jews. So they were so hopeful about that. Hosanna doesn't necessarily imply that it's God you're talking to, or Jesus. They would have used that in other situations too. And keep in mind that many of these people, we're talking the whole city, many of these people who were saying, Hosanna, welcome, son of David, they were among the ones who would also want him crucified a few days later. Okay, I am. Thanks. Let's see. So this king came with no crown, except the crown of thorns that was forced on his head. He did not have an elegant robe, except for the one that the soldiers put on him while they were ridiculing him, and no war horses. Fortunately, that is mostly the end. I would just urge you, I would like you to write this down, record it somehow, or maybe I can also put it in the WhatsApp. If you would read this week, in addition to the gospel accounts, Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53. Those are one of several messianic psalms, and if you had not read them or you did not connect them to what Jesus was going to endure on that day, it is completely worth it.
You know, for me, Palm Sunday, as I told my wife, it's funny, after years of ministry, I've never preached about Palm Sunday. Never. I'm just not a religious guy, and I think I almost did it out of rebellion. But the reality is even as Pattie brought it up and I began to look into the season, Palm Sunday is really, it's a lens into Good Friday and Easter, the resurrection of Christ. And how we handle Palm Sunday, the coming of the King and his kingdom, it determines how our walk with God will be, what it looks like. Because what we see, and I love that Pattie read some of the scriptures that jump into the time of Luke writing about this, picking up in verse 38, chapter 19. Blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven. They're talking about Jesus is coming in, all that Pattie talked about, the triumphant entry, the rejoicing. Many people just caught up in the fact of who this is, and it talks about all the miracles he had done and how people came to see the one who had raised Lazarus from the dead. There was a stirring about him. Most didn't fully understand what it was, but they knew something important was happening. And you see the reactions of people, and then you also see the kingdom that Jesus is bringing. And Pattie alluded to it, that he was coming with his kingdom, but they were expecting a different kingdom. And to me, the point of this time as we look back and reflect on Palm Sunday, that entry, is how people perceive Jesus is also how they began to walk out what he did on the cross, how they received what he did or didn't receive it. And that remains true today. Who he is, who we see him as he enters, as he's on that cross, as he dies, as he is born again, as he is raised from the dead, it determines our Christianity. It determines our walk. It determines our future. And so we have to look rightly through that lens. Because the Pharisees in verse 30 right away, but some of the Pharisees among the crowd said, "Teacher, rebuke your followers for saying things like that." They were so religious, so caught up in the stuff that they missed the one that they were actually waiting for. And so Jesus responds and says, if they kept quiet, the very stones would cry out. Trying to help them understand, creation itself cries because I am the one who created it all. And friends, today, as we look ahead to Easter, we have to allow any wrong understandings of who he is to be shifted to what they should be. And then we see the kingdom that Jesus brings. Again, as Pattie alluded to, and we'll get to that part in a second, but here in Luke, verse 41, it says, but as he came closer, as Jesus came closer to Jerusalem and saw the city ahead, he began to weep. People are gathering. People are rejoicing. People are caught up in all of this. It was a massive crowd. It was a massive moment. They were gathered for the Passover to celebrate what God had done. But in this, Jesus looks over these people. He doesn't, when he says Jerusalem, he is speaking of the city, but it's the people in it. And he says, how I wish today that you of all people would understand the way to peace. But now it's too late, and peace is hidden from your eyes. Before long, your enemies will build ramparts against your walls and encircle you and close in on you from every side. They will crush you into the ground and your children with you. Your enemies will not leave a single stone in place because you did not recognize it when God visited you. We need to understand Easter is not, and it's not even really Easter, that the name isn't the one we should use. But the resurrection is truly, we're celebrating Christ coming out of the grave, rising again from the dead. But we need to recognize it's God that is visiting us, the one who has come through the gate, the one who came in the way that was prophesied, the one who came in triumphant. He is God himself visiting us. What people need is they don't need fancy meetings, they need Jesus. But we have to understand that first before we can live that or convey that. And the reason it's so urgent is because this hour, He is coming back. Again, Pattie alluded to that. He's coming back to call those who are His. And we don't know how long the time is. Those who wrote the Scriptures thought He was coming in their time. And it wasn't because God was playing tricks on them, but He is coming. But we, God's people, have to recognize it's God who has come to visit us. And then it goes on and it talks about Him clearing. It says, then Jesus entered the temple and begun to drive out the people selling animals for sacrifices. He said to them, the Scriptures declare, my temple will be a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of thieves. The kingdom that Jesus is bringing is a kingdom that is both compassionate and desperate to see people recognize their Creator. But it's also one of righteousness that will not tolerate the things of this world. No matter what our world says, no matter what our politics say, no matter what is put forth, no matter how much people want to twist the truth remains. This is about His kingdom and this King. And He's not going to change it. Thank God. But friends, how we handle the King that has come and the kingdom that is bringing, that He has brought and is bringing, will determine everything. And God, I felt, gave me 3 specific words. We'll either face denial, can't be. Can't be God, can't be Jesus, can't be a Savior, and push Him away. We'll face delusion, where we make Him what we want Him to be. He's going to make my life better. He's going to approve of this and not approve of that. He's going to twist because, that's old thinking and this is new thinking. We're deluded if that's the God that we think came through that gate. If we think that's the kingdom that He's brought, it's wrong. And it's not because it's this is right and this is wrong, though that is true. It's because what is wrong, sin, keeps us in captivity. It keeps us in bondage. It keeps people enslaved to sin and doomed for hell. It's bigger than simply black and white, right and wrong. Righteousness brings us into freedom and hope in the thing we were made for. The King coming on a donkey through that gate to save us is coming because He has to bring in His kingdom, His way, His righteousness. And the third option out of that is dedication. Some saw Him, recognized Him, maybe not instantly, but like the centurion who recognized Him as He died, as the earth opened up and realized who this was. Dedication, giving our lives to the right one, to the right King and to His kingdom. We either deny Him, we're deluded about who He is, or we're dedicated to who He's called us to be. Friends, as we look upon the season that we're celebrating, this Holy Week, let it be holy. Let it be about Him. As Pattie urged you, look into those Scriptures she gave you. Look into the 4 accounts and read what Jesus spoke about before and after. Look how He came in and the things He did. Because after He cleared the temple, He stayed and He taught. Because the heart of our King is a compassionate heart that wants all to come to salvation. But He's not going to bend things to our will. It's His kingdom. It's His way. And His kingdom brings salvation. His kingdom sets people free. His kingdom saves the most broken, most lost, deepest of sinners from the deepest of sin. But friends, how we see Him determines how we live this out.